Hey guys, what's up? It's Jack and welcome back to another video. And today I want to talk about Dante's Inferno because ever since the game came out and to this day, as a matter of fact, I played it, I think the better part of a year ago. I have to admit that I have always appreciated the game ever since it released, and I still continue to appreciate it now, and I will always go as far as to say that it is a damn tragedy, or in this case, should I say, it's a sin that this game never really got its sequel, or should I say two sequels. And, you know, I'll even go as far as to additionally say that just because a game is labeled as a clone of another famous franchise doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Now, obviously, there will be people that will disagree, there will be people that agree, and then there's going to be people that are going to be in between. But in my humble opinion, Dante's Inferno was a game that absolutely deserved a sequel, or obviously two, to finish its story overall, if it was going to follow at least in a certain way of the poem that was originally made, that was supposed to be 3 parts. And quite frankly, I think it had all the legs in order to make it happen, but unfortunately, it just didn't. So now, some of you guys might not be familiar with this game, so I'm just gonna kind of pretty much talk about it and explain it as if you and I were having a conversation face to face. And Dante's Inferno is basically an OG God of War, I don't want to say clone, so I'm just going to say lookalike. Or should I say an OG God of War alternative, right? Okay, so there's a ton of similarities, but at the same time, there's a lot of differences as well. And the story goes that a man, Dante, essentially dies and basically has to go through the 9 circles of hell in order to not only escape hell, but to save his beloved wife. As a matter of fact, he also dove into hell as well in order to kind of go after her and to save her, which is actually kind of opposite from what the poem itself kind of went through. She was actually supposed to save him, if memory serves correctly. But regardless of which, it's not always, you know, you don't always have to be tit for tat in terms of the source material in order for the game to be the way it is, but obviously because the game is the way it is, it just kind of made sense for them to go in this direction. But regardless, I digress. But anyway, we're gonna keep going with this. So basically, that's the story, and it's basically an action adventure game, or should I say just an action game overall, that it's got some pretty interesting cutscenes. Some of them are a little bit more animated like cartoons, and or should I say like animated films, and then others are pretty much like your standard, you know, 2010 cutscene style. And just like God of War, there is basically there's violence, there's blood and gore, and a whole bunch of disturbing images, and of course your nudity here and there, right? So Dante's Inferno was definitely an M for mature rated game. And when you go through the 9 circles of hell, there are some circles that are depicted better than others, but for the most part, I would say at least half of them are actually displayed pretty damn well and are pretty graphic in their own right. Lust is definitely graphic, especially when you consider the boss and some of the things that you see, as well as some of the enemies that you fight that you see. And when you're talking about a God of War alternative, it literally is that in terms of its combat. Obviously, you have a choice on whether or not you can save a soul or whether you can completely just eviscerate it and just get a little bit more XP towards upgrading your stuff and everything like that, if memory serves correct. And also, actually, no. The way it goes is you have your good cop, bad cop, so to speak, right? So if you make a moral good decision, you're going to upgrade, you know, certain types of upgrades, and at the same time, if you make a selfish decision that may not be very moral, it will upgrade the other sides. They're in red and blue, so it's basically a very unique way of kind of having an upgrade system. And then of course you have Beatrice's, which was Dante's wife. You've got Beatrice's cross that you basically carry with you everywhere, and it works kind of like a projectile that's quite addictive to use, actually, and it actually goes pretty well with the rest of the combat in terms of combining your projectile moves with the cross along with your melee weapon, which is a scythe as well, that you basically pretty much get after the first boss fight. And at the end of the day, there's a whole bunch of enemies that you face that pretty much more or less, depending on whichever circle of hell you're in, depict that very well. And again, some not so very well, but for the most part, it's pretty well done. And at the same time, you've got boss fights as well, and as well as kind of like these multi-type of enemies to where you can basically do a lot of similar things that you can in God of War, such as the finishing moves, things like the QuickTime events with the buttons that come up on screen and stuff like that. It's all pretty much here. And the cool thing about Dante's Inferno was that it was also a multi-system release, right? It wasn't just an Xbox release. It wasn't just a, so basically if you had a console, you can pretty much play this game. And even though it really didn't sell very well compared to some other games like God of War, which by the way, it came out the same year as God of War 3. And obviously everybody and their mother was obviously anticipating God of War 3, and it definitely prevailed in pretty much every aspect, especially when you look at the graphics of that game. God of War 3's graphics were so far ahead of other PlayStation 3 titles for the most part. It was absolutely ridiculous. And of course, it was the final chapter in the God of War saga at the time in terms of closing out Kratos' story. So when you put all that together, Dante's Inferno really did have that to go up against. And quite frankly, even though Dante's Inferno from a gameplay and story perspective and everything else actually did a pretty damn good job, sometimes you just, you just can't help the fact that God of War was just untouchable at the time, right? It really was. And on top of that, it was the third and final game of that particular story of the Greek saga. As a matter of fact, nobody knew whether or not we would ever get a God of War game again, and it wouldn't be up until 6 years later to where we would find out, and then 2 years later after that to where we would get God of War 2018. So quite frankly, Dante's Inferno, despite all of these different things that it had to go up against, I would have to say that not only did it do very well, and it was also very fun to play gameplay wise, but again, as I stated at the very beginning of this video, that to this day, I still believe that this game deserves a sequel. As a matter of fact, maybe it should be remade, or should I say remastered. And then after that, hopefully that would spawn enough of an interest in order to basically get hopefully a sequel going, or should I say in this case, 2 sequels going, because quite frankly, as time has progressed when it comes to Dante's Inferno, from everything that I've seen on the internet, as well as some conversations that have been had here and there, I would have to say that, well, I think people appreciate Dante's Inferno even more now. And I think part of the reason why the game didn't succeed as well as it could have financially, at least in my opinion, is the fact that, again, it had God of War 3 to go up against. That is one of the biggest things. But the fact that it was available to all console players for the most part, whether you were a PlayStation guy or an Xbox guy, or whatever it was, I think that was definitely a big thing. And for the most part, for the people that actually played the game, the vast majority of those people, at least according to Metacritic, which got a 75 if memory serves correctly, that's a pretty good chunk of people that actually gave the game their blessing when you think about it. And obviously there's those people out there that absolutely love the game and would even say that they prefer Dante's Inferno to God of War for reasons of their own. I think a lot of that has to do with the very subtle differences between the two, as well as the story and a few of the visuals and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I think a lot of people really love Dante's Inferno. And again, with time, it's only gotten more and more respected. And I think especially if you're, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're Xbox or whether you're Sony or whatever. Obviously, we know Nintendo is definitely not gonna, fit the bill for a remaster of this game or anything like that, to where they're basically in charge. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I think this game should, at the very least, be remastered or remade, or whatever term you want to call it. And at the same time, with that kind of appreciation and how well that game would sell, in my opinion, if done correctly, would absolutely, I think, would spawn a sequel. And if there's any game that actually comes to mind in terms of that got remastered a few years ago, or should I say more than a handful of years ago, that there's rumors floating around that there's going to be a 4th game, that would be Spyro Reignited. When you think about Spyro Reignited, those 3 games were remastered extremely well, right? And now there's word that a Spyro 4 has been in development, and it's going to have RPG elements and stuff like that. And of course, when you look at the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy that was also remastered very well of the original trilogy, guess what? There was a 4th game that actually came to fruition as well. So when you think about that, I have to ask myself, like, why can't that happen with Dante's Inferno? There are games throughout history. This is just one game, right? Specifically, there are other games out there to which they have their own story as to why they didn't get a sequel that absolutely deserved it. And I'm sure in time on this channel, we're going to be talking about a few of those games. But with that being said, I think Dante's Inferno absolutely, at the very least, deserves a remaster, and then eventually a chance at a sequel depending on how well that remaster sells. And I think especially now, since the game is appreciated that much more and there've been retrospective videos made on it, and the views of those retrospective videos have been pretty quite successful, and obviously it's something that I think a lot of people would actually embrace when you come to think about it, especially now, you know, because of timing. And as you guys know, timing when it comes to gaming and when it comes to just pretty much everything, timing literally is the biggest most important factor. And that's one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing, that kept the game from actually reaching its full financial potential, was the fact that God of War was right there as well. And of course, people took to God of War. Simple as that. So with that being said, guys, I really want to know, after having this conversation, do you guys think that Dante's Inferno is worthy of a remaster or a remake? And then obviously with the 2 sequels, Dante's Emporium and Dante's Paradise. So I really would like to know. And of course, would you like it to be in the same format that it was done in terms of the way the game works? Or do you guys think that all 3 games should be different? Like obviously the first one that we had was kind of an action game, pretty much, you know, a clone of God of War. And then do you guys think the sequel should be a little bit different from a gameplay perspective, which was actually rumored to be that when they actually did have a little bit of a development time in that, to where they were going to make that game different? Or do you guys think that they should stick to the formula and just make a sequel all the way through? And of course, with the 3rd game, do you guys think that that game should be different? I personally think they should all be the same, because when it comes to a title of a game, people have a certain expectation. You know what I mean? So it, like for instance, if a Souls-like game were to be like, let's say, a first-person shooter, all of a sudden, I think fans wouldn't take to that very well. Although they might play it because it could be interesting if it offered enough differences. But I don't know. This is why I ask you guys these questions. So I would really like to know down in the comment section below, what does Dante's Inferno, or what did Dante's Inferno mean to you? Do you believe it is worthy of a remake and a remaster, and of course sequels? And of course, how do you think should do it? And of course, who would you like to develop this game? I mean, obviously in a fantasy world, if Sony Santa Monica were to actually take a break from God of War or whatever, or from Loki or whatever it is that they're doing, and kind of like continue on with Dante's Inferno with their way, that would be kind of interesting and kind of poetic if you think about it. Even though they kind of would have no reason to do it because they kind of been there and done that with God of War. But at the same time, I think that would be kind of interesting. But with that being said, you guys are probably more familiar with the different development studios than even I am. So I'd really like to know all your thoughts down below. So with that being said, guys, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to watch and or listen to this video. I enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed having it. So with that being said, thank you again, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.